All right, take it away, Jenny Olson.
All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is actually our third webinar with Dr. Dan. This week we had one for therapists on Tuesday, part 1 of 2. Last night we had one for parents with a really great attendance. And obviously today is our webinar for teachers. So I'm the prevention director at Mentis, I should say, Jenny Olson. And we are really excited at Mentis to be offering these webinars in partnership with Napa County SELPA. Both of our agencies work with youth and support in a holistic way the village of people that work with youth, parents, teachers, therapists, and anyone else that comes in contact with our young people. And Dr. Dan sort of, does the same thing. He works holistically with adults that work with youth and families as well. And we're really excited to have him here today. Let's see, where did his bio go so I can introduce him properly? Dr. Dan Peters is a licensed psychologist who has devoted his career to the assessment, consultation, and treatment of children, adolescents, and families, specializing in learning differences, anxiety, and issues related to giftedness and twice exceptionality. He is passionate about helping parents and teachers engage children in the classroom, at home, and in life so they can realize their full potential. Dr. Dan is co-founder and executive director of Summit Center, author of several books about anxiety in children, and co-founder of The Parent Footprint, an online interactive parent training program. A few housekeeping items. Please keep your mic on mute. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can type them in chat and I'll be collecting them and asking Dr. Dan towards the end of the presentation questions you have. And this group is a little bit smaller than our parent one, so we may even be able to have a conversation. You might work better for this smaller group. So without further ado, I give you Dr. Dan. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Again, thank you to Mentis and Napa County SELPA for having me here today. And I always enjoy talking to teachers and educators because you guys are so important in the lives of youth, and you are there every day. You're in the trenches, and especially now during these new kind of trenches that we're all experiencing. And so today is about how to build resilience during these uncertain times, and to the degree that you all have time in your schedules, like how to think about incorporating, even from a mindset perspective, of how to cultivate resilience and coping skills and problem solving in students at a time when there is so much stress and uncertainty going on. For all of us. And so one of the main points of today is this applies to all of us. So these skills, while for building resilience, coping, and problem solving in youth, is also for us adults, for us to cultivate them and think about them in our own lives. So the context of how we have all been living and how you have all been teaching and educating through so much. We have a pandemic, we have fires. Napa County particularly has fires. Just having clients over the years from Napa and knowing how many of my clients have gone through the fires and then gone through them again, and just the trauma that gets triggered when these catastrophes, these natural disasters are lurking. The whole virtual learning environment, I'm sure most of you never thought you would be teaching through a screen, and probably many of you never want to again if you can help it. I think it depends. Everyone has their own experience, but just to have just empathy and awareness for the challenge of engaging students, especially the young ones, on a screen and teaching them everything that you are supposed to be teaching them in the curriculum, and just all the uncertainty that we have in regular life, and then particularly in our modern life. And then just as we're getting ready to get rid of 2020 and everyone's raising a glass to cheer 2021, we have the Capitol and the riots and the attack on the Capitol. So more uncertainty, more stress. And then of course, there's just all the things that there is to worry about. And we're going to be talking about what that looks like in our kids, our students. And so this is a problem that we've had before the pandemic. And this is a problem that has gotten worse since the pandemic, right? We have kids that are stressed out. When I say kids, children and adolescents. We have too many kids who are stressed out. We have too many kids who are anxious, depression. Those both are on an all-time high. The older they get, the susceptibility to turning to alcohol and drugs. And then there's self-harm, and there's cutting, and then there's the worst of them all. The kids, what we say is finding a permanent solution for a temporary problem and taking their lives. This hit, my youngest is 16, and she lost a friend 2 weeks ago to this. And so it's really, it's terrible. And it's happening, and, and it happened before the pandemic, and all of this is continuing to happen. And we just can't, I can't emphasize enough how stressful this environment is for everyone, what we've been living through. So this is a quote, an inspirational quote that I try to internalize when thinking about my children, who are in the older ages now, 16, 18, and almost 21. And then also for all of my clients and students. Treat people as if they were what they ought to be, and you help them become what they are capable of becoming, capable of being. And so this is an interesting one, because we often treat kids, adolescents, as they are in the moment, right? For the behavior that they're exhibiting in the moment, not following through on schoolwork, not being responsible, not showing regulation, being impulsive. And it's like, how do we see beyond that and sort of raise that bar, raise our expectation or our belief in them so they can rise to being that person that we want them to become, and that we believe that they're capable of becoming. And so when we think about life, these truths, right? These truths are to be self-evident here is we know that there are going to be struggles in life. We know that life is stressful, and we know that there's always adversity. And knowing this, how can we help these kids grow to develop the skills necessary to navigate life? And we spend a lot of time on a lot of other things with kids than intentionally trying to cultivate this coping, this problem solving, and this resilience. And so today is really about thinking about that, again, in the midst of everything that you are required to do and what you have to teach, is like, where will there be opportunities both directly and indirectly to bolster these skills in your students? And when we think about resilience, it's basically, how do we bounce back, right? How do we recover when things don't go well, when things don't go like we wanted them to? And how do we rise above difficult circumstances? And we are clearly in difficult circumstances now, and that's macro, and there's difficult micro experiences that our students have on a daily basis. So when we think about what are we trying to help these people become, see them as who we want them to be, here's what we know about resilient people. They see a challenge as an opportunity. When presented with a challenge, they're always looking for a solution. And when a person realizes that they can solve problems, they can figure out a way, it increases their confidence to push through future challenges that they're going to face, because then they start to internalize that they have this ability. Like, if they can struggle through a math problem, if they can struggle through a project or a writing assignment, that will help them realize they can do something challenging again. So, a few more truths. Children need unconditional love, security, and deep connection to at least one adult. And you know what? This research has been around for years, and it continues to be the same. One person, when you see someone who has risen above adversity, who's incredible life circumstances, there's always one person. And guess who it is a huge amount of the time? A teacher or an educator. Huge amount of the time. And that's just how important you all are in the lives of these kids. I remember going to a conference years ago. It was actually an early annual conference it was actually a conference on gifted children. I remember the president of the organization was giving a talk and talking about his days in the classroom, now a professor, and that there was a child who came up to him when he was at the drinking fountain. And the child started to say, things are really, I've had a really hard time. And this teacher said, oh. And the child said, yeah, my dad beat up my mom, and my dad's in jail, and my mom is really hurt and needs medical attention. And he said, oh, wow, I'm so sorry. And then the child said a few more things, and this teacher said a few more of those, oh, I'm so sorry. Let me know what I can do. And basically that was the end of the exchange. And years later, that student came back to that teacher and said that was the most pivotal moment in that student's life, at one of the darkest times, that there was someone who listened to them and let him know that he mattered. And this was an incident that just didn't even register to this teacher. And the teacher actually felt that he handled it very poorly, because he was a new teacher and he didn't know what to say to the student who was bringing such heavy information to him. So it's like these exchanges matter, and particularly matter to kids who are dealing with a lot of adversity in their lives and in their homes. When we think of the bar, Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, is that we want the expectation to be just beyond the reach of the student. And if it's just beyond the reach, that person can grow and stretch and get to that expectation. Conversely, if something is too high, we're teaching learned helplessness. The child, they learn that there's nothing they can do. They're helpless. If the bar is too low, they never learn to stretch, right? They never learn frustration tolerance, working through something difficult, and getting to the other side, which increases that confidence. And then finally, the idea with resilience is that the way to build resilience is you actually have to experience adversity, right? So this is a challenge these days, because we are seeing a lot of adversity due to the pandemic. And what we're needing to assess is, like, is there just too much adversity? How do we manage the level of adversity? Or is this something that we don't need to add more adversity to this student's life right now because they have plenty of adversity, right? So it's just trying to go through this lens of adversity is needed to build resilience, but what is too much given what we're dealing with? So resiliency does reach its limits. And what we say about resiliency reaching its limits is that it's when the external demands overpower one's internal resources, right? So the internal resources aren't enough to handle the external demands. And we're seeing a lot of this. And these are all the different ways that we can see when there is a breakdown of resilience, and when there's a student that is needing some help, some shoring up, some support. So we see physical symptoms, right? We see headaches and stomach aches, biting nails, picking on skin, a fatigue, a draining of energy, starting to get disinterested, kind of burning out, a change in the behavior, grades dropping, sadness, irritability, anger, and then as we talked about, going more towards substance abuse and self-harm. Like those are the negative coping mechanisms, coping skills, and we're wanting to cultivate positive coping skills. So as educators, as important people in these students' lives, we're wanting to look at, what are we seeing? Are we seeing a problem? Are we seeing a change in behavior? Are we seeing, again, the frame we're talking about is the lack of resilience, or a hole is being poked in the resilience, and we're needing to figure out a way to provide some support. So the 7 C's of resilience, this is from Dr. Kenneth Ginsburg, who is a world-renowned pediatrician and expert on resilience on the East Coast. He's written many great books. He's got wonderful website, wonderful resources. This comes from his book, Building Resilience in Children and Teens. And we're going to talk through these 7 C's because you can really see as teachers, as adults in these kids' lives, is how can we cultivate any of these C's in kids on a day-to-day basis. So Dr. Ginsburg says each C builds upon the one before. And also, I will add, is that if we can add anything to any of the C's, we're benefiting our students, our children's lives. So competence is basically teaching a skill, right? Like that they can handle a situation, they can do a math problem, they can spell, they can engage successfully in completing a project. And so this is about promoting new skills. And of course, in any new skill, we're wanting to guide with wisdom and safety, right? School-related tasks don't often have the same necessarily safety issues that maybe other life tasks have, that parents might have to navigate. But when we think about competence, you're thinking about how do you help a student build a skill? Because when they feel competent in skill or skills, then they gain confidence, right? Then they get this belief that, okay, I am good at something, I can do this, right? It comes with this internal trust that I have this ability. And when they get this confidence, as I've talked about before, then they have more belief that they can weather and handle what's to come in the future. So we have competence, which gains confidence, and now we also need connection. It's so key for kids to be connected to their communities, their family, their friends, their school, their churches, their synagogues, their scouts, their sports teams, because there's value systems that are woven into all these communities. And when you're a part of something, it's beyond you. And that when they get the experience of helping other people through being connected, they also get to know that they have others that they can go to as well for help. They are not alone. So this connection actually becomes a very important part of building resilience. And then here's where you all come in as well, is we know that kids who are connected to school do better in life than kids who are not connected to school, not connected to their learning. Right? When we look at the research out of Challenge Success at Stanford, is the number one indicator of well-being, health and well-being in youth is school engagement, right? And think about what a challenge that everyone is having with keeping kids engaged in school during a pandemic. It's really challenging. And when these kids are connected to school and connected to their teachers, that's where they get this love of learning and this value of learning that they take with them through life. And when it comes to resiliency, it's like if we are faltering, if we don't have the knowledge, but we know that we can learn and have belief in our learning, and we're shown that we are good learners, we can take that with us and figure something out. Character. So the next C is character. Resiliency is about building character, building a sense of what is right, what is wrong. Again, that value system. And when people have a strong set of values and character, they can go back to that when they're in a very difficult situation that is taxing the resilience. And this next quote is something that I share personally in when I was in my mid-20s and I was suffering from my resiliency was really broken down. I was going through a difficult time towards the end of graduate school. It was a rainy day. It was a dark, rainy day. I was struggling. I was in traffic. We were at a stoplight, and there's this car in front of me had this bumper sticker. If you don't stand for something, you stand for nothing. So being in that struggling position that I was in, I thought about what do I stand for? And then I started to panic because I couldn't think of anything I stood for because I was not myself, right? My resiliency had reached its limits. So I spent the next day or so really thinking about it, and I was able to find my way back to the things that I believed in, my character, which helped me find my way back and get my resilience back. So something I will never forget, and I try to share when appropriate. Then we have contribution. When and this is related to being connected, right? When we contribute, when we help, when we are a part of a community, it means we matter. It shows the kids that they matter, that they're showing up makes a difference. And then they can believe that, okay, the world, I matter to the world. The world's a better place because I'm there. I remember one of our kids, sixth grade teacher, core teacher, and she was known for, she'd have her students line up, and every single day for 30 plus years that she'd been teaching, she would individually say hello and greet every child as they entered the classroom. Every single day. Right. And what parents reflected on is that how much that this teacher made the kids know that they mattered from that just little check-in. And I just thought that was really just special. And of course, there's many ways to do this. That's just one. And then when kids contribute, when they contribute to a classroom, right, they have a sense of purpose, right? I'm in charge of this. I'm able to do this. I helped with this. So again, if you think about all of these different C's, like where are there these opportunities? And then there's coping. You're going to hear that a lot today, is about how do we increase coping? Because children who can cope can deal with life's challenges, and they're prepared to engage with challenges with their coping skills instead of those negative coping skills, whether it's going towards drugs and alcohol or self-harm or other risky behaviors. We want them to use their coping skills and have the resources. And then finally, there's control. We're going to talk a little bit about control later, but the idea here is if we feel that we have some control over some aspect of our life, we feel more resilient. We feel that we are not a victim to circumstance, that are completely helpless, but we can impact the outcome. And when we can do that, we're able to bounce back. We're able to be more resilient. So I know this is a mouthful, but these are all the things to think about, right? Competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, and control. And also, I know you're going to be fed a lot of information today. I don't want this to feel overwhelming, but I also, as much as you can, as you think through these concepts, is where you already are doing this, right? Because I think a lot of times we're focused on the difficulties, and we, especially people who run more hard on themselves, is to think about what are you doing right? Like, how are you building these skills, building this character, building these C's in your students? Then there's the 4 S's. This is from a great book, The Power of Showing Up by Drs. Dan Siegel and Tina Bryson. And this is for, it's often, it's primarily written for caretakers, but it's for caring adults. And I just think it's this simple model to think about when we're interacting with our kids, our students. So kids need to feel safe, right? If we even think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like we need to feel safe in the world. And safety is key. And during COVID, safety is continually and constantly challenged, right? Constantly, are we safe? Are we being safe? How do we be safe and live our lives? So safety, we have to think about how do we help the kids feel safe, and particularly safe in a classroom, safe to participate. And we know a lot of times that kids with learning disabilities and learning differences don't always feel safe because they're worried they're going to be called on, they're worried they're going to look stupid, and they're worried they're not going to be able to follow, or someone with an attentional issue is worried that they're going to be made fun of when they're not following directions and everyone sees that they're missing it. So we need to try to cultivate safety. We need to help kids soothe, feel soothed, be soothed when they're upset. We need to see them. They need to be seen for who they are. I mean, this matters for kids. It very much matters for those adolescents who are going through their identity issues and trying to fit in and not knowing who they are and trying on a whole lot of new different looks and behavior and attitudes. And so what the research shows is that if kids feel safe, if they are able to soothe and helped to be soothed when upset, and they're seen for who they are, they develop a secure attachment to themselves, a secure attachment to others, and then have a sense of resiliency in the world because of that security they feel. I know many of you have heard about grit, which is a more modern, sassy word for resilience. Angela Lee Duckworth, I'm sure many of you have seen her TED Talk, I think it was 2017 perhaps, went viral. And basically her research showed that people who work hard and don't give up succeed, and most of the time have better outcomes than people who are just smart. Like, you know, we have this all of this reliance on intelligence, and the idea is that we really overdo intelligence and underdo effort and how hard one works. And so what we know is that people who learn to overcome adversity, to show resilience, have this lifelong grit. They're gritty. And so again, we're seeing a lot of kids even before the pandemic. I think a lot of you might agree that it's like, what is up with this, these decades, this generation of kids that are lacking frustration tolerance, like they're lacking this disappointment muscle. So our world has changed since we were all growing up. And a lot of people say that things have gotten a lot softer and kids have gotten a lot softer, and why don't they toughen up? Well, this is a way we're like trying to help them mentally, with fortitude, develop this grit and this resilience so they can dust themselves off and persevere. And I also know many of you are aware of Carol Dweck's work about mindsets, and it's still, it's so important and it's so foundational. Want to review it with you, with the difference between this fixed mindset and growth mindset, the fixed oriented and the growth oriented. And you know, you have these students who, with this low frustration tolerance, that they want to get it done right away and they want to get it done right. And they're less invested in learning. They're more invested in getting it done and getting a good grade and not trying very hard. And then you have the growth oriented mindset, which those are the kids that are able to struggle and are interested in learning more so than the grade, the outcome, the trophy. And so what happens as adults, parents, teachers, coaches, we often inadvertently reinforce a fixed oriented mindset when we're telling kids, good job, you did it again. Wow, that was awesome. That was amazing. And we're not focusing on how hard they're trying. I mean, particularly with bright students, they just show up and they do well with little effort, particularly in the earlier grades. And a lot of times we're not catching on to that. They're basically learning that this is what it means to be smart, to show up and breathe and do really well and get really good grades and everyone thinks you're smart. And that has lots of ramifications for down the road when things do get hard and they're with their intellectual peers doing whatever they're doing, and they don't know how to push through. And they think that if they actually have to stretch and they actually have to put forth effort, that means they're dumb and they're imposters, they're frauds. So we really want to try to cultivate this growth-oriented mindset, because basically what mindsets predict is either looking smart or learning, right? Looking smart with a fixed mindset, or learning with the growth. Effort over ability. The fixed mindset is just looking at what their ability is. The growth is looking for towards effort. And then basically resilience, right? When we have a growth-oriented mindset, like, we can climb up this mountain, even if it gets steep. We can crawl on all fours. We're going to get there. The fixed-oriented mindset, like, this is too hard. I'm not good enough. I can't do it. So when we are building a growth mindset, it's really about, like, what are we thinking about? Our language, thinking about our interaction, thinking about what we are reinforcing in our students. Are we reinforcing effort versus outcome? And this is where I actually love schools, even colleges, that still put participation as part of the grade. And I know that's the smaller colleges are able to do that more, or the smaller classes than the larger ones. But when you think about, a lot of times participation, it helps when you're younger, and and then when you're older, that kind of just leaves the grading system. Like, is it effort or is it outcome? Are we looking for reinforcing persistence, or are we looking for pure mastery of concepts? And are we focused on the process versus, again, that outcome, the finish line? And are we focusing on the problem-solving aspect? I often think about this, and I'm not commenting on any math curriculum, which I know changes a lot. But what I think about, as someone who did not like math ever and always struggled with math, I felt more hope when I could show my work and the teacher could see I was trying, and I could get partial credit, even when I couldn't get the exact answer. And what that did, it reinforced with me, is if you don't know it, still try, because there's a process to math. Whereas sometimes, we know how the kids who don't want to show their work, there's that one. And then there's times when, it's just, the reality is, it's just if you're right or you're wrong. It's just to think about how we're cultivating this problem solving. And then the whole idea of engagement, which I know is so challenging these days with distance learning, is how do we keep the kids engaged in the learning process? And then ultimately, again, it all comes back to building this resilience. They go hand in hand. Also, Dr. Tina Bryson and Dr. Dan Siegel, they have another book called The Yes Brain. I just wanted to point out these two different columns. The one on the left is the yes brain. The one on the right is the no brain. Okay. And I'm assuming it's the left for you and the right for you. The one that says higher order thinking, the yes brain. So let's think about this. Higher order thinking. So thinking about our thinking, call it metacognition, thinking about our thinking. Being curious, being resilient, obviously, compassionate, insightful, open-mindedness, problem solving, and having morals. That's this yes brain. So that will argue is like the resilient brain, the growth brain. And then the no brain, which is more of the discouragement, less resilient brain, is reactivity, worrying, stubborn just to be stubborn, like not open, highly competitive due to insecurity, feeling threat, anxiety, and has less coping, and doesn't really have that empathy and understand others, right? So those people struggle more. So we're trying to get, and then what we know, the reason that they've written so many books, is that the brain is, we know neuroplasticity. People with no brains can be slid over to that other side when we're cultivating and building these skills in them. So their book, The Yes Brain, is divided into these 4 sections. And it's like, how do we help kids become more balanced between their emotion, their body and their brain? Connect them. How do we help them be more resilient, right? This term keeps coming up, that being resourceful so they can deal with challenges and have that confidence. How they can be insightful. Dan Siegel coined the term mind sight, how you become more mindfully aware of yourself and others. Again, that metacognition, and then that empathy towards others, right? That's huge in resilience, to be empathic, because empathic towards yourself, empathic towards others, something to draw on. And I just wanted to add this. I had the fun privilege to interview Dr. Borba, who is a very well-renowned psychologist. And this is her new book that's coming out in March called Thrivers. And there's more to the title. And it's basically this book is about the difference between kids who thrive and kids who don't thrive. And as you can see from this list, how much it corresponds. So like all the research is coming together, it corresponds with what we've been talking about with what's the yes brain, what's a growth-oriented mindset, how do you, the 7 C's, the 4 S's, is self-confidence, empathy, self-control, that regulation and balance, having integrity, the morals. So now we're getting to morality again, being open with curiosity instead of closed, having perseverance and grit. And then this is a new one, is the optimism, right? Optimism and gratitude, which we're going to hit on. So when you think about like these skills and think about the pillars, and I think about it, it's like what are the signs hanging in the classroom, which I know you guys have fun signs in the classroom when you're in your classroom with kids. And it's like, what are we trying to continue to cultivate when it comes to this character? And I just love the idea of a thriver. Someone who's thriving is resilient and jumping out of airplanes with lots of people, as you can see. This is no news to y'all, that too much screens cause problems, and yet we are all on screens way more than we used to be, and our students are on screens way more than they used to be. It's just, we need to be aware that too much screen time does create problems, right? Irritability, reactivity, trouble with focusing, on top of some kids with regular focus issues, being preoccupied when they can get on Minecraft again, when they can jump on the game with their friends. And the anxiety and the depression really is about the social media. And it's just to be aware of, particularly as we get to older elementary school, definitely middle school and high school, how much depression and anxiety results from social media and bullying and isolation and not being included. And it's something that we're just trying to make sense of as a culture, because we can't monitor it, especially with these older kids. And so it's just, again, something to be aware of if someone's struggling, particularly one of these older kids, is what could be getting in the way. And too much screens and social media definitely impacts resilience. The other thing this topic has to be mentioned is sleep. Sleep is actually getting a lot more press lately, before the pandemic, about how important sleep is. I mean, the research is just nuts about how important sleep is for all of us. Dr. Valerie Crabtree was on my podcast. It's a great, she's a sleep expert out of St. Jude's research. And so it's just wonderful information. We just need to sleep. And we need to get enough sleep. And if we don't get enough sleep, it just impacts all aspects of our lives. And, we're living in a time that even pre-pandemic is that a lot of teens with screens and lots of screens in the room aren't sleeping enough. And it has lots of implications. So anything you can do to help cultivate the importance of sleep is building resilience. The other thing that I learned on this podcast is this idea of what's called sleep pressure. And Dr. Crabtree was saying that many teens can't get to bed before, like there's a sleep pressure in the brain, which means you're ready to sleep. And oftentimes before 11 o'clock, that brain just is not ready. So it's like the challenge of, if the brain doesn't get ready to 11, when do you healthily get off screens before 11 so the blue light can sort of leave your brain, and that you then have enough time to do some sleep before you have to wake up early in the morning for your activities. Okay. Anxiety, fear, and perfectionism. This is like lions and tigers and bears, oh my, here. I wanted to do a deeper dive with you all in this area to talk about what it looks like So how you might recognize it, I mean, I know you see it, and also an idea for a psychoeducational approach to help kids understand, and us, how this works in our brains and our bodies, and what we can start to do about it as we're going to move towards our resiliency plan and cultivating resiliency. So first of all, we have to understand the difference between anxiety and fear. Okay, this dude is the worry monster. He's someone I'm very fond of talking about. So a lot of my work and ultimately my books, which came out of the work, use an approach that involves the worry monster. And the whole idea of the worry monster is the idea that we, in order to gain some control over something that's happening in our lives, we need to create some space. So from a therapeutic perspective, it's called it's a narrative approach, because we need to create a new narrative. And so we call it externalizing the problem, the perfectionist monster, the worrying monster, whatever we want to name it, it creates space. So these images are to be, to give it a little levity, but often when I'm working with kids, we're talking about the worry monster, and especially the younger ones, even the teenagers, it works for them. Some of the older kids like to make different names, which is fine. But really this stuff, I find it sticks when you're trying to have a dialogue about, what's the worry monster telling you guys right now? Hey, is the worry monster lurking, everyone? Okay, guys, let's stop and do a worry monster alert, right? Like however you have an opportunity to talk about it, it's a way to externalize it. So by way of education, psychoeducation, we think of anxiety as an irrational fear. An irrational fear is something that has a very, very low probability of happening, like dying in a plane crash, right? It's a very, very low probability. It's a very, very common fear. Let's say a parent not coming to pick you up. Depending on where you live, someone breaking into your house. Like it depends on the fear and the reality of the situation. The irrationality comes from when it's a very low probability. Fear, on the other hand, is a very important part of our survival mechanism, right? This saber-toothed tiger is going to scare us, and for good reason, because we need fear to be able to survive. So fear is adaptive. Fear is part of our evolutionary development. And what happens is we have these small adrenal glands on top of our kidneys that are there to produce massive amounts of adrenaline, which then creates the fight and flight response. So what happens is we have this big frontal lobe where we do all our great thinking. This is why we are masters of the universe and many animals are not. And then there's this little almond, this amygdala, that is the fear center in our brain, in our limbic system, that emotional part of our brain. And that thing is always sensing for danger, again, to keep us alive. That's its only job, is to keep us alive. And when it senses danger, we go through this fight, the survival response, the fight or flight response, sometimes also the fight, flight, or freeze response. And when we have the fear response, all of a sudden it's like danger. And our amygdala tells our adrenal glands to produce massive amounts of adrenaline so we will not be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or beat up or whatever it is, but it's life-threatening. So what happens is our heart starts exploding out of our chest because the blood is going through our heart. We're breathing as fast as we can through our lungs, and we are becoming superhuman, fighting or running machines. These next two slides are pretty phenomenal in the sense that they are all the physiological sensations that occur when we are in a fight and flight response. I will spare you from reading them all to you. They're in alphabetical order, but check out for a moment all of these physiological sensations when we are in a fight and flight response. Tons. And there's more. All of this from excess adrenaline running through our body. And so this is what happens to us. This is what happens to our students when their amygdala is activated and they're in a state of heightened fear arousal. and how difficult it must be to be having these symptoms and to have to learn and to have to produce. So when we think about why do we get this extra adrenaline and where does it come from? And how do we think the fight and flight response gets activated when we are not in a life-threatening situation? For example, reading in front of the, or giving a oral report in front of class, doing a math problem, taking a test, trying out for a production or an athletic team. So the cognitive model of anxiety is when we have scary thoughts, the what if thoughts, so what if this happens? It basically activates the amygdala. And then when we think more scary thoughts, it just keeps activating more and more messages to produce more and more adrenaline, right? I'm going to fail the test. My parents are going to be mad. I'm going to be grounded forever. Everyone's going to think I'm stupid. I'm going to have a terrible life. I'm going to be a failure. Squirt, 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 squirt. And all of a sudden we're on complete overdrive, fight and flight in a non-life-threatening situation. And so here he is, the worry monster lurking. And as we talked about, what happens is when the heart is starting to beat at an incredible amounts per minute, per second, to get all of that adrenaline to our arms and our legs. And then we have the sensations of like having trouble breathing. I can't catch my breath. And then you don't feel good because you have these stomach aches and diarrhea, nausea. And here's what happens. In order to get the adrenaline to our arms and our legs, right, it has to go through the bloodstream. Where do you get the blood? Where do we get this extra blood? We get it from the organs that have the most blood. One of them is the stomach. And when the stomach shuts down because all the blood gets diverted, we get these understandable physiological uncomfortable sensations. Equally, the brain has a ton of blood. Oh, let me just say, with the stomach ache, we say we don't need to digest a cheeseburger when we're running from a saber-toothed tiger, which is why that whole stomach shuts down and the blood goes elsewhere. When the blood leaves our brain, dizziness, lightheadedness, sometimes you feel like you're losing control, you're literally losing your mind. It's really scary, and that's because the blood is leaving our brain and just is there to do the autonomic nervous system responses of survival. And then we say, like, we don't need to solve a complicated math problem when we are running for our lives. So helping kids understand this from a psychoeducational approach is like, it's something that seems so important to teach them about how their brain and body works and how the worry monster picks on them and what happens when the worry monster does come to town. And then there's the weirdness, and the kids kind of get a kick out of this one, because you know how you get that tingling sensation sometimes, or sweatiness in your extremities, and you might shake a little bit. I always tell the kids, I was a painter one summer, a student painter in college, and I worked for this interesting Vietnam veteran who had zero fear and would ask me to do all of these things that he would do too, like get on that ladder, and a third-story extension ladder, and want me to hang over the eave and paint it on the outside. And I remember going up the ladder to this thing and holding on, and my legs were shaking like I was a cartoon character. Like it was the pure fear response. And what that should have told me is, get off the ladder. This is not smart, right? And so what happens is when we have these physiological responses like this, the blood and the adrenaline is going to our arms and our legs, but it's leaving the surface of the skin so we can be wounded in battle and not bleed to death. So the kids, especially the ones that like Dungeons and Dragons and all of these war games, like they think that is awesome. So it's a way to tell them, like, yeah, our bodies are meant to survive. We are meant to survive. The question is, are we in a situation that we need to survive, or is the worry monster bullying us and picking on us to activate this response in us? So ultimately now, like, what does anxiety look like? What do you guys see in your classrooms or on your screens? We see the physical manifestations, and we see the behavioral manifestations, often of anxiety, right? So when someone's sick, they might stomach ache, headache, they might be having anxiety, particularly if it happens a lot. And then all of the behavior, the avoidance, the meltdowns, the crying, the oppositionality, particularly in learning, often there's a fear under that may or may not be related to a learning disability, a learning difference. And that, am I okay? Is this okay? Do you like this? All of this is anxiety, the worry monster visiting. So I want to just quickly go through so you guys will just be even more keen in being able to identify the different types of worry and anxiety that you see, that we see regularly. So there's the panic attack, and the panic attack is basically the ultimate fight and flight response, just that rush of adrenaline and then that overwhelming, I can't breathe, I can't think straight, something really bad is going to happen. There's generalized anxiety, and these are your students who are just, poor things, are always worrying about everything or most things. It's generalized. How did I do? When is this going to be due? What if I don't understand? Just lots of worry. That's where the worry monster is just like going to town on these kids. Then you have agoraphobia, which agoraphobics tend to like pandemics, which is they don't have to leave their house. And the reason they don't like to leave their house is because they're afraid they're going to have a panic attack or something really bad is going to happen to them, and they are not going to have a way out. So what happens is things build, like I have a panic attack in a restaurant, and then I don't want to go to that restaurant, but then I go to another restaurant and I smell something similar to that other restaurant. So now I start to have a panic attack. I'm not going to any more restaurants. I go to a supermarket, I see a food or a smell that reminds me of that other smell. Okay, I can't go to these anymore. And it just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. And this is why we really want to help kids face their fears. OCD, this is often very quiet. It tends to happen with kids that are, and people on the higher, smarter intelligence level, because there's so much to be thinking about with obsessions and compulsions and try to live in life and do school and do work. So the whole idea is there is often an obsessive thought that is disturbing. Something bad is going to happen if I don't do this. And then there's the compulsion. I have to do this to make sure that bad thing doesn't happen, or just to make me feel okay. The problem with this is it's self-reinforcing. So basically, every time I do the thing to stop my irrational thought, it just feeds that I have to do it again, or it's going to keep coming back. So with these kids, with usually the help of a clinician, we try to help them stop the cycle and realize that this OCD monster, this type of worry monster, is just lying to them, and they're actually going to be okay. But it's often a pretty systematic process to help reduce it. And the other thing that people ask with OCD is like, well, how do I know if it's a problem? And this is where I say, a problem is not a problem unless it's a problem, which sounds kind of silly. But you got to think about, is it a quirk, or is it something that really gets in the way of functioning? That's the thing to really think about. Like, does it cause distress and get in the way of functioning? Then we have social phobia. These are the kids that are afraid of being embarrassed. They're afraid of talking in front of the class. They're afraid that everyone's looking at them. So we see a lot of this. And then there's good old specific phobias, right? This is afraid of a specific thing, a spider, heights, a dog. There's separation anxiety, which again, those kids that have separation anxiety are liking virtual school a lot more than those who do not. And then finally, there's PTSD. And this is important to highlight in the sense that we know that kids do get PTSD, like adults who get PTSD when they're in life-threatening situations, if they have seen horrific things happen at home or in their community. And there's also a lot of kids who do get, I would say, traumatized with a small t from bullying, from very poor school experiences that are chronic. And we just have to be aware of, again, when resiliency reaches its limits, sometimes it's because of the prolonged negative impact that a student is experiencing in some sort of schooling environment. In none of your classrooms, I'm certain. Okay, and then there is perfectionism, which is not a formal anxiety diagnosis, but it's a type of anxiety. And in talking to the clinicians, the therapists, both at Mentis and at SELPA on Tuesday, they're saying they're seeing a ton of this. And again, this is pre-pandemic as well, which is this fear of failure, this self-loathing. I'm never good enough. It's never enough. A fear of I'm not going to be the best. And what happens is this is a lot of no-brain stuff. This is, I'm restricted, I'm living in fear, I don't want to try anything new, I'm not curious because I need to stick to what I know and what I can do really well. And we know that this is a problem when the fear of failure exceeds the feeling of joy during any activity. And so again, it's just something to know about, because a lot of times with your students, this is going on when you're seeing a lot of work scratched off, multiple drafts, they're not turning work in, they're really hard on themselves, really punitive. This is when they might need a referral to get some help. Also, what I say, where teachers are in a great position to help a perfectionist who is one of these really strong students, is to help them, give them an assignment to miss half of the problems on purpose, or only do half of the work, or to misspell, or to just to do a poor job, and that's the assignment. And that gets to be petrifying to these students, but it helps them start to realize they don't have to do it at a high level, and they're going to be okay. Okay, 10 steps. 10 steps for cultivating resilience, and this is in for our students, but also in yourself as well. This applies to all of us. Okay, so first, self-awareness. We need to help our students check in with themselves. And this is a great thing to incorporate, in your day at certain times during your class. Like, all right, guys, we're going to take a self-temperature. We're going to see how we're doing. We might want to just take note on a scale of 1 to 10. 10, we're feeling great. 1, we're feeling really bad. 5, somewhere in between, just to help them become more self-aware. Ask them, so they can learn metacognition, how to ask themselves how they are feeling. Am I doing okay, or am I struggling? What are the students seeing from you, right? This also really applies to parents as well, and I talked about this with them last night. But also I would say for teachers too, they're always looking, and now they're always looking at you, particularly when you're on a screen. And it's sort of like, how am I managing frustration? Right? We all get frustrated. How are we managing it? And here's the heroic thing, I think, as adults, is when we tell our kids and our students when we are having somewhat of a tougher day, or if we didn't handle a situation well, and that we're going to work on handling it differently. We're going to get impatient. How about saying, yeah, you know what? I'm feeling a little impatient right now. Hold on. What I want you to do is, while you guys read, I'm going to take a little break and just breathe a little bit. Right? Modeling for them resiliency and humanity. And also to help kids realize it's okay to ask for help. And part of being resilient is knowing when we need help. When we need help from a teacher, when we need help from a parent, when we need help from a friend, right? So this is huge, to have the awareness of, how am I doing? Do I need to reach out because my resiliency is reaching its limits? Self-regulation, the worry monster, right? What am I thinking right now? Is it true, right? Metacognition. How can I change my thinking about the situation? Well, math is hard for me, but when I study, I do okay on the tests. I'm not going to fail. There are all these kids who think, I'm going to fail. What does fail mean for many of them? I'm going to get a C, right? The high achievers. We need to help them, like, think about their thinking, and think about, again, what this worry monster is telling them. Can I change my thinking so it's more rational for the situation? And how can I breathe through the situation? I mean, these are foundational resiliency, coping, problem-solving skills. And just if we can give kids this, it's huge. Because a lot of our students don't get this modeled for them at home, right? So it's like, this is why these teachers and educators are so important, to model this behavior for them in a really human way. Gathering information. So when we problem solve, we need to gather information. Now, we also need to manage the amount of information, because we have screens, and we have the news, and we have social media, and often part of, again, we talked about with resilience, is getting too much of that information. So we want to help our kids know that, you know what, if you have a problem, you should seek to gather information. You should talk to someone. You should ask someone. And if it's appropriate, you can do some research on the internet to find out about a problem that you're having. But also know if you're seeing something that is disturbing to you, talk to an adult so an adult can help you understand whether this applies to you or is something that is just there to actually make people scared, because we know a lot of stuff on media is to make people scared. So I also say with COVID and the political scene, it's like we really need to help kids manage the information that they're being exposed to. And again, and with self-awareness, what is too much? Like I was telling the parents last night is I've always stayed away from news as much as possible to keep my worry monster away. But the way I ended up coping with what was going on with the election and what was going on with the attack on the Capitol was to watch, the transition of power was to watch way too much news. And I had to realize, like, okay, I'm watching too much news. Like, this is not good for me. I'm getting way more than I need. Trying to have that self-awareness. Acceptance. This is huge in life. This is a la Dalai Lama here and Buddhism, mindfulness. We need to try to accept the current situation we are in, whether it's a small situation or a big situation. What we know is when we don't accept reality, we experience distress, we experience sadness, we experience anger, we experience irritability, we experience worry. So we want to help kids learn about acceptance. This is what's happening. I need to accept it so I can move on to how am I going to deal with it. And part of this with COVID is like, how do we deal with this new normal? How do we deal with distance learning? It's temporary, but it's here right now, and it's here for a little while. So acceptance for all of us is a huge coping resiliency skill. Here's one that I would have loved to have learned when I was younger, is the whole idea of what can you control and what can you not control? And this was a big thing being talked about that I was talking about with a lot of groups and a lot of clients especially with the beginning of the pandemic and well into the pandemic. What can I control during a pandemic when I'm worried myself or my family is going to get ill? Well, I can wear a mask. I can socially distance. I can use hand sanitizer. I can not be around big crowds indoors, right? Those are some things I can control. What can I control? What other people do, how quickly the vaccine is disseminated, all of this stuff. And it's so whatever it is helping kids realize, hey, let's break this thing down. Here's a situation that's challenging. Where do you have control? Remember, this is the 7 of the 7th C. Where do you have control? Where do you not have control? How can we let go of the things that we don't have control of and focus on our plan? Make a list, our plan to take down this thing that is challenging us. You've heard this a lot, problem solving, how to help the kids use their great thinking brains. Like these kids problem solve a lot of stuff in school. How do we remind them that it's the same brain, the same frontal lobe, the same process to problem solve a life situation, to problem solve the adversity? And for them to take, to assess, okay, here's what I did in this situation. Did it work and should I keep doing it, or do I need to do it differently? Right? For you, problem solving, okay, like, and I'm sure you've done a ton of this. Okay, what's working? What is not working? Right? And I always been saying modeling this stuff for the kids to say like, you know what, I tried this thing yesterday and I can kind of tell that this one didn't work out as well as I would have liked. So we're going to try it this way. I was trying something new. I wanted to be creative. And just modeling that for them. You know, I was taking a risk, and part of taking risks is sometimes something doesn't work. So, and then what's a new opportunity that comes within this situation? Because we know that resilient people see obstacles as opportunities. Self-care for all of us. I hope and encourage you all to have your self-care rituals, to continue your self-care rituals during this time. And, we have to model this for the kids and teach them, like, taking care of themselves is key. Sleep is part of that, right? Physical health, emotional health, like, it's key. It's important that we all exercise. It's important that we all do things that bring us joy, that distract us. When we need counseling as part of self-care, right? This is what, again, we have access to the therapists in the schools and in the community, is like, when do these kids need extra help, and showing them that, what, this is resiliency, is reaching out for help and getting tools. And then having whatever it is on your list of running. Mine is running. I have to run. I have to be outdoors. I need that for my coping. And I know that about myself. And so, how do we help kids tap into themselves of what they need that calms them, that distracts them, that fills them up? And again, for all of you, I'm continue to encourage you to keep doing it yourselves. We have to stay connected. This is a time of disconnection. We have the crazy irony of screens telling kids to get off screens. And now screens are the way that many of them communicate and have play dates more and more and more. So just the idea of, when we think about, again, that connection of the connection of the C's, and being connected to school, being connected to people, like, we have to be connected. The kids who are isolated are getting depressed and anxious. We have to find ways to keep them connected. Staying present, again, going back to mindfulness. If there's like one thing that I always can give during a session or during a talk, it's the idea that the one thing for calm and inner harmony, and to push off the distressing human emotions, is to stay present, to be in the present moment. Like the Dalai Lama talks about that everything that occurs, everything that is feared is in the future. And when we live in the future, we tend to be anxious. When we tend to live in the past, we tend to be depressed because it's already happened. There's nothing we can do about it. And what he says is, back to what can you control, what can you not control? The Dalai Lama says, if you're worried and there's something you can do about it, do something about it and stop worrying. If you're worried and there's nothing you can do about it, stop worrying. There's nothing you can do about it. And we know this is so easy to say and so hard to do. How about moments of the day with the students where we're focusing just on the present moment and reminding them that the present moment is fine and that all of our worry exists out there in the future? And what an important skill for us to become aware of when we're thinking about the future and it's causing us stress, and what a skill to pull ourselves back to the present, to be able to say, okay, I'm here right now. I'm just going to think about this. I'm not going to think about that other thing. That's for later. Gratitude. So lots of research to show that when we practice gratitude, we experience elevated energy, elevated emotional and psychological health. To think about, to remind the kids, even in the midst of a pandemic, what is one thing that you're grateful for? For us to remember, what are we grateful for? To focus on what we have versus what we don't have. And when we do are able to focus on gratitude, we're able to be in the moment because we're thinking right now about what we do have. So when we want to put all this together with the stress reduction resiliency plan, we've talked about all of this. Like, how do we help kids identify and address a problem? What's the problem? What can I do about it? What can I do about it? What is stressing me out? And can I just stay away from that? Can I let the things go that I can't control? Am I using too much screens? Right? Kids can get very honest about knowing they're on too much social media or too much screens. Even if they can't change the behavior right away, how to be aware. Exercise, eating healthy, sleeping, and then having the way to have that release, whether it's running, jogging, talking, crying, journaling, meditating, doing yoga, whatever it is, to have that thing. Few final important reminders, just like that teacher I told you about, just listening does so much more than we think a lot of the time, just listening to students. Being a model for them of how to cope, how to take risks, how to be resilient, how to be human, like show them, especially the ones that don't have those models at home. And to remember that it only takes this one trusted person to make a difference in their lives, a huge difference in their lives, and to create resiliency and success and security. And finally, just to ultimately tell you how much you guys all really, really, really matter. A lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, so much. I think that we can now open it up to questions, and we can just go ahead, since there's, smaller group, just to unmute yourself and ask if you have a question. The one question that did come up in chat is if you'd be willing to share your slides with the group afterwards.
Yes.
Okay, Lily will send those to you.
That's the easiest question. Let's stop it right there. That was good. Yeah.
100% so far on the answers. Questions, anyone?
Or thoughts, right? Anyone, if you just have a thought to share too. We're connecting. You're connected. I'm going to look at all your faces now since I didn't get to see you. It's good to see faces.
I have something to share. I work with a lot of teens in Napa County, and they share with me, they've been sharing with me, especially this year, how much they know that their teachers care about them and how hard their teachers are working. They probably may or may not say that to you, but I hear it. And I think a lot of us hear it, even if they get frustrated and they don't participate on Zoom. It's really, as you know, hard for them, but they do appreciate how much effort and time and flexibility that their teachers are providing. They know it's hard, and I just wanted to share that they really do appreciate their teachers. Here's a question: what do you do when your anxiety is warranted?
Problem solve, right? So when their anxiety is warranted, so that's a good question and a tricky one. So there's something called signal anxiety, which some people write about, and that is that we have a signal that we're in an unsafe situation. So for example, when I'm on the third story of a ladder hanging over because someone who's much older than me, who's my boss, telling me to do it, that's a signal that I'm anxious for a good reason. So anxiety, the fear, if we think of the fear response, it's a message, it's an indicator that we're not in a safe situation. So what we do need to assess then is, if I'm feeling anxious, is again, why am I anxious? Is it something that's going on now? Is it something that's in the future? And is there something I can do about it? And we got to work really hard to go into action, resiliency planning, of doing something about it and trying to let go of the aspects that you can't control. And that part is hard, but that's why if you can separate it and try to spend the energy on the things that you can do, either internally to change your thinking about the situation, or externally to try to impact the situation that's causing the anxiety.
Dr. Dan, I wanted to ask you a question about that, because I teach fourth grade. Mm-hmm. And so 9 and 10-year-olds don't usually have like a whole lot of tools in their toolbox to be able to solve the problems that they have. Mm-hmm. So when I hear all the time anxiety that is well-founded, that they can do nothing about. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things where, in the middle of a pandemic, your landlord has just told you that they're going to be renovating the apartments, and so you have to move out. So your family is scrambling and looking for a place to live. Ideally, you'd like to be able to stay where the families and the kids and the teacher, but you don't know, you might end up moving to, who knows where. And that's causing a lot of anxiety. There's nothing that those students can do about that.
No.
And another, at first we were told that children don't catch COVID. So I'm very surprised when I hear of a student that at 9 or 10 years old has tested positive for COVID. And that adds a whole nother layer of anxiety that trickles out to all of us. Right. So, what can we do about that? Nothing. So we get layer upon layer of anxiety,
right,
that we can't do anything about. And I think that that's where we end up at the end of our resilience rope. And how exactly are we going to help our kids, our families deal with these, very real situations? A sibling has tested positive, has symptoms. A parent is tested positive, has symptoms. And, a 9 or 10-year-old is tested positive, but they're asymptomatic. So it's, we're in a place where we can't solve the problems, and we can't really find good answers.
No, thank you for that. We'd all like to be on your beach, right? Away from all of this. So yeah, that's validating what you're saying. I think what it makes me think of is first how we just listen and how we take, right? Like by listening, like just take, hear it. And it's a way to, at least for them to get it out of their brain and their body and their heart and their spirit, and validate it. Like, yeah, that's really hard. And yeah, that is scary. And that's where I feel like if we can move to, is there anything I can do? Like, is there? In some of these cases, there's not. If you have some people in the home who have it, it's like, okay, how is your family handling it? Are you wearing masks in the house? Are you using hand sanitizer? You're trying to problem solve. And the other thing, which I just think of in horrific situations, is like, this is where, how do we help kids accept these really hard situations? And again, this is the ultimate Buddhist Dalai Lama-esque thing, but I always remember him saying that, it's how can we try to find a way to be okay when our life situation is not okay? So when I think of this student who's going to have to move and doesn't know where they're going to go, how do we help them prepare for that? Right? I mean, it's like, we can't solve that problem. And can we talk it through with them? Where do you know where your family's looking? Do you know it? And so I just feel it's like, this is that process of trying to be there for them in the midst of these terrible circumstances.
We have another question. I teach theater, and I'm used to my students finding solace in their art. My students are having a really hard time following through with their ideas, and I'm having a hard time supporting them and cheerleading them in ways they are used to. I don't want to put extra pressure on them, but I know how great they will feel if they push through and produce some art. I'm in a quandary about how to best support my students and myself.
Yes, hard to push artists, right? And particularly when they're stuck. I'm wondering, as you talk about, I'm glad, and you said, and for myself as well, it's like, I'm wondering if there's an exercise that they can engage with you, if it's like, how comfortable you feel sharing with them your own stuckness and your own stuckness during this artificial way of teaching and doing art, or not art, this way that it's not usually done.
I'm very upfront with them about my own stuckness.
Okay. Okay. Are they are they are they willing to engage with you for like an activity of how we can all try to move through this together?
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's not, nothing's happening, nothing's moving.
Yeah, I think when we're together, they're like pumped. And then,
Oh, I got you.
I think that once they leave the Zoom, they're like, it's really easy to forget. And we just have a lot more time together when we're in person, and we're more productive, I guess. And
I see. I got
yeah,
it.
I don't want to push them too hard. I don't know I don't want to pressure them.
Yeah, I don't know if it's pressure. Like, there's ways to keep encouraging for their own creativity and their health, and you go through that door. If you basically say, like, I don't want to pressure you guys. Like, if you keep acknowledging where they're at,
Yeah.
but you keep emphasizing the health aspect of this. My push to you guys and my nagging to you guys is because from my life experience as an artist, I know how hard it is to create in difficult circumstances, and yet how that is imperative to get through this. And so I want to keep pushing you guys to help you get through this. And I think you keep pushing. I mean, are you having any strong resistance to them?
No, they're just very apathetic. They're just kind of like, yeah, we're doing it. Yeah. And then nothing's happening.
Yeah. And so I'm just seeing clinically in my practice, and I just, before this, talked to a college student, and we're seeing a lot of apathy, which, I mean, to me is it's a step above a bad depression, where you're just really down and you're just totally out. So there's a lot of apathy, which is just like, what's the point? And some of them can articulate it, and a lot of them can't articulate it. They're just like floating around in this nothingness. So I guess I want to normalize that for you as just a state of being right now. And we're trying to just give them something to care about in a context which is hard to care.
Mrs. Gaynor gave a really great, I don't know your first name, suggestion that that we put a focus on their art being something that's helpful to others. And
Nice.
So giving them a mission to connect and to be a support. I think that's a really cool idea.
It's a great idea.
And might light their fire a little bit.
Yeah, that they matter for somebody else. Yeah.
Even connecting them with younger students.
Mm-hmm.
You know, find a teacher.
Well, they're making a lot of thriller films. They're like really into horror right now.
Maybe not younger students for that.
Well, if you ever want younger students, I have a batch of fourth graders that would love to be an audience.
We're going to try to do some drive-through theater that might be more all ages appropriate. But right now they're filmmaking and not producing anything.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I empathize. I mean, I empathize. It's hard. What I've found in my role as therapist is not like trying to really level with them and meet them where they are, as opposed to try to like rah when there's such a disconnect with like, no, like you can do this. And it's like, I found myself, like, we ended with this college student. The last thing we ended with is him saying, COVID effing sucks, as he was looking out the window of the mall where there's no students, right? Because they're not allowed to be out there. And so I just said with him, I'm like, yeah, that pretty much sums it up, huh? And I just felt like he just needed that validation right there. I'm like, so do we end on that one till next time? And he's like, yeah, I think that's a really good ending for today, right? So I just feel like maybe you're not gonna, I just had to go with it with him. And but I'm saying, like, I think we have to validate too, again, during this temporary, long-term temporary time. And sometimes the validation lands better than our cheerleading and motivating. It's like, we just got to keep trying. I guess what I'm saying, like, we just keep trying, and we tell them, hey, I'm keep trying to find a way to help make this, what I would say is tolerable for you, manageable for you. survivable for you. And the other thing, you guys, is we are going to look back on this time. Like we're all in it right now too, right? You know, like when you don't know what you've been through until you've been through it. And I think we're all going to look through this and say, like, how did we even do this? So as I know you guys all have pressure to teach and to get output, and I empathize with that. You get to stay big on the screen until someone else talks, it looks like.
Any other questions?
I just have a comment.
From space, a comment from space.
Yeah, well, I was thinking, I've been thinking a lot about the International Space Station that's been kind of orbiting around, and there's people up there, and they actually train to be like this, you know, remote. And I always think about, like, they actually wanted to do it this way. So we might have some astronauts in our midst, and we don't even know it because they're getting the training right now. So and NASA has some pretty good science programs. I don't know if you ever look at them, but I do all the time for inspiration.
Gosh, I like how you think, right? This is that finding opportunity and creativity, and we know that there are a lot of introverts who are loving this, you know, they are preparing for maybe to be an astronaut or sorts. They really are loving this time. And but I like the reframe and that different lens, literally, as we're seeing you in space, which is awesome, is you know, like how for them to see this differently, what our other abilities can be cultivated during this temporary time. Thank you.
All right, well, we've got about 2 minutes left. If anybody has one last burning desire, question, or thought, but otherwise we will share this recording with you, or we'll be posting the recording on our mentisnapa.org website, sharing the slides with you, and we'll also share Dr. Peter's website, which has, you know, links for all his podcasts and his books, and he's busy. You're a busy guy, Dan. You do a lot of stuff, you know, which I've discovered the last couple of weeks as I've kind of done a little bit of stalking and gotten to know you better. So thank you so much for all your time and just the valuable resources, and, you know, holding space for us as you're, you know, sharing all your wisdom. It's been great.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Be well.
Thank you all for being here today. And I'll get those links and things out as soon as I have them. So take care, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mentis, and thanks, Dr.
Thank you.